This morning's passage that we heard from Deuteronomy paints a lovely picture for us of the entry into the promised land. In Greek, it's Exodus. So you have the Exodus out of Egypt and the Exodus into the promised land. And like I say, the image that is painted in this morning's reading is one of bounty. It sounds beautiful. It sounds like God has provided everything that the people of Israel will need. There's a second story that is parallel to this one, and it's found in the Exodus account, and it is where the people of Israel enter into the promised land, but there are already all kinds of people who live there. There are different nationalities, and the people of Israel are, as they enter into the promised land and are confronted with these other peoples, there's conflict. And the conflict results in battles and wars and the attempted annihilation of those who are present in the land when they arrive. And so this morning, I want to hold those two accounts together. Because one account, the account that we hear this morning in Deuteronomy, is an account that comes from an understanding of God's bounty and that there is enough. In our hymn book, there's a hymn. We probably won't sing it for a while because it's, I think, 15 verses long. And it's called Dayenu. And Dayenu is the Hebrew word meaning enough. And it says, if God had just done this, that would have been enough. If God had just brought us out of Egypt, that would have been enough. If God had just fed us with honey and manna, that would have been enough. If God had simply led us into the promised land, that would have been enough. And so there's always this sense that God is offering just a little more than we need. Whereas the other account, the account where the people enter the land and they find that there are others who are going to be consuming what's on the land with them, there's a sense that the thought is we need just a little bit more. So God gives us a little more than we need, or we need a little bit more than God is giving us. And so there's this competition. I want to suggest that we as people of faith, that we as people who gather on this Thanksgiving Sunday, that we might want to take on the robe, we might want to take on that sense that God gives us a little more than we need. Always. That we are always well cared for. That God is indeed a God that loves us, that loves all of creation. And that as we make our journey through our lives, if we see that we are always going to be cared for, then that gives us the capacity to be that much more kind, that much more compassionate, that much more generous with those who we travel with. So as the people of Israel enter that promised land, they see the bounty of the Lord. They celebrate. And so the psalmist actually picks up on some of that sense of celebration. But the reading from Deuteronomy, it talks about, like there is just so much there. That the people now, having traveled for 40 years through the desert, they're entering the promised land, and they see that that God has indeed been faithful. That God has indeed been faithful. And that they are now in that place that they first dreamed of when Moses first brought them out of Egypt. So after all of the disgruntlement, after all of the bickering and the fighting and the creation of false idols and all of those, like the rest of the story, they are now at that point where God has proven once again to be faithful. But that second story, it's always in the back of my mind anyway, when I think about this, the Exodus and the Isidus. When I think about it, that second story, the people, as they enter in, they fear. They fear that, yeah, it's there, we can see it, but maybe it's just not quite enough. If we have to share it with everybody, then maybe it won't be as good as we think it could be. And so we're going to try and figure out a way to hold it for ourselves. On this Thanksgiving, as we celebrate the bounty, I want to challenge us to move beyond that sense of fear, to move beyond that sense of we need just a little bit more, and to trust that God is truly going to be faithful in God's bounty. It makes a difference. It makes a difference. There have been studies done, a number of them over the years, and consistently, the result of the studies, the conclusion is that there is enough food in the world to feed everybody on the planet. There's enough food in the world to feed everyone on the planet. There is enough money in the world to make sure that everybody has potable water, has a roof over their head, has food on the table, has clothing, is able to be educated, all of that. There is enough on the planet to do all of that for every single person. So why is it that there are people in Canada who can't get safe drinking water? Why is it that there are people in Niagara who do not have a roof over their head? Why is it that there are children who go to school in our backyard without having breakfast? Why is it that, those questions, I can continue with those questions, and the answer is that those who have don't necessarily want to share because they don't know that they have enough. What is it that draws a billionaire to make another $1 billion and another $1 billion and another $1 billion? It's walking into the promised land and seeing the bounty, but being afraid that if I don't hoard, if I don't find a way to keep as much as I can for myself, then at some point I'm going to run out. Now, we've already heard this lesson, right? During the Exodus, God says to Moses, I'm going to provide bread in the desert, but the people can only take as much as they need for that day. If you take more, the story says that there were people who took more and it rotted overnight. Jesus talks about, in the Gospels, Jesus offers the image of the birds of the air, the flowers of the field, that they don't worry, they're not fearful, and God provides. That Solomon himself is not robed as beautifully as the flowers and the birds. And Jesus says what we need to do is to have that level of faith in God who provides. And if we can have that level of faith, then not only do we have life, but everybody has life, and everybody has life abundant. Now, it's hard. It's hard. This is a tough one because because every single one of us, we have our concerns. And if it's not a concern for ourselves, it's a concern for our children or our children's children, and so we worry about that. And so I just want to share this story that back in 2000, who remembers 2000? You know? Back in 2000, there was a whole movement towards the Jubilee. And the Jubilee was it's a Jewish concept where every 7 years there's the release of prisoners and the forgiveness of debts, and that happens. And then every seven years, it's an even grander event. And so for 2000, we talked about what would it be like if globally debt were forgiven. So countries that right now spend more than half of their annual budget on the payment of interest on debt to other countries or to the World Bank or various places. What would it be like if we just forgave all of that debt? And what if we actually started looking, so as Canadians who are blessed with bounty, what if we were able to share some of that bounty with those who are living in places that are not quite as blessed as we? And a woman, so I was chairing a committee at the time, and I talked about the Jubilee, and I talked about it in a way that I was convinced, I was convicted that we could do something serious that year. And a woman came up to me afterwards, and she said, Bill, because I wasn't ordained at the time, so she didn't know whether to call me anyway. So she said, Bill, I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. I believe that that's true. I believe we should be able to do it. But, and here it was, right? But I worry about my grandchildren. I worry about my grandchildren. What if they can't have everything that I have? Or what if they can't have everything that I had as a child? And I went away. I thought about it because I told her I would come back with an answer. And so it was at a presbytery meeting. Our presbytery meetings were three days long, and so before the end of the meeting, I went back to her and I said, "Listen, I think I have an answer for you. And I think the answer is that I need to see the child walking down the street in Beirut or Baghdad or Nairobi, or pick a place. I have to see that child as I see my grandchild. And if I want my grandchild or my child to have a meal on the table and shoes on their feet and a roof over their head, how can I not want to see that for any other child in the world? For any other child in the world. And when we can get there, now we can't do everything. We can't do everything. We can't fix the world's problems all on our own. But we can start to make those small steps. Because I believe that small steps lead to big steps. And big steps can change the world. And so on this Thanksgiving weekend, as we gather in our smaller versions of family meals, and I know it's a little bit more challenging this year to think about it, actually, for me. But as we gather in our small family groupings and try and make do with a Skype call or a Zoom call or FaceTime or something with family who can't be around our table, as we think about all of the things that we are thankful for, even in the midst of this pandemic, let's try and think of a way two ways, one step, two steps that we can take to share the bounty of our table with those outside of our doors? How can we as a faith community share the blessings that are ours outside of the doors and the walls of this sanctuary? How can we make our God, who is a trustworthy, bountiful, gifting God, how can we make our God known to people who are struggling, to people who don't know what they have to be thankful for? If we can make that our goal for this Thanksgiving Sunday, if we can make that our goal for the days and weeks to come, then we can truly be tools used by the hand of God to bring the kingdom of God just a little bit closer to being reality. Thanks be to God.